مرحبا، وياكم خالد الجابري وأحدثكم من بودكاست صوت الفلسفة. اليوم حلقتنا مع أحد أساتذة الفلسفة اللي درسوا في الإمارات وخارج الإمارات، وبنعرف أكثر عن تجربته، عن شو الفروق بين الطلاب اللي درسوا الفلسفة في الإمارات وبرا، وشو المجالات أو حتى الأسئلة والأفكار اللي كانت تهمهم. وحلقتنا اليوم بتكون باللغة الإنجليزية. Welcome د.كيرت.
Hello, Khaled. How are you?
All good. You taught philosophy in different kind of places in the world. Did you witness any differences between the people in UAE student of philosophy in the university in dealing or learning philosophy comparing it to other places?
Yes, actually. So as you said, I did teach in Canada and the United States before moving to the UAE. So I taught at Queen's University and Trent University in Canada, and I also taught at Northwestern University in the States, where I did my PhD. And yeah, I have in my almost 5 years now in the UAE observed some differences in the students. I would say the first difference that I've noticed is, of course, at the most general level, there's different levels of preparedness, in the sense that I think students in North America generally tend to have, let's say, more of an exposure to philosophy prior to entering into the university. Mm-hmm. So I would say that would be the first difference. But I think that difference, the gap is so slowly closing. So I think that here more and more students are being exposed to more humanities and philosophy at the high school level. So I think that's slowly changing, and very soon that won't be any longer the case. The second, I think, difference is, what's interesting is particularly that I find that students from North America tend to really prize their written work, and they really emphasize, or they make the most effort on written assignments. Whereas for students here in the region, I find that they like oral presentations a lot better. And actually, I adjusted my assessments accordingly, because I find that they really put their best effort when they're presenting in front of their peers orally. In fact, the best presentations that I've had in my career, that I've seen in my career, are from students from the region. It's very interesting, because I noticed when I first came and I would just give them written assignments, I didn't see that passion, I didn't see that effort, right? Just in a dry written assignment. So I'm like, okay, I will have them write something, but also present it in front of their peers. And that really brings the best out of them, I find, right? So whereas I think in North America, students don't really care so much about oral presentations. They really are fine with just submitting a paper, and they're okay with that. But I think that adding this performative dimension, this oral dimension here, really brings the best out of students. And as I said, as a result, I've got some amazing presentations from students that I still remember from years ago. Really amazing performances. So yeah, that would be, I would say, the second difference that I've noticed. The third, I would say, would be simply that I think students here are a lot more interested in applying philosophy to concrete contexts. So they really want to know how these ideas, these theories, these methods apply to real life, to apply to their experience, apply to social reality. Whereas their North American counterparts are perhaps more comfortable simply, playing around with certain ideas purely at the level of the abstract and at the conceptual, and not necessarily wanting to see particular examples, or let's say, of applying them, which is interesting. So, but I find the students here really want to kind of see how these ideas play out. What can they do with them? How can they apply them?
Are we more practical? Are we more pragmatic in dealing with the ideas of philosophy?
I would say yes. I would say that's a good way of putting it. I think that there is this kind of practical or pragmatic dimension, but I think, I think that is, of course, one aspect. Just another side of the coin, right? So they might be interested in one side, and let's say maybe students interested. Students in North America are interested in the other side of the equation. But I think also that the students also appreciate here, the more that they start learning philosophy and the deeper they go into the theory, they begin to appreciate also the theory, right? And they can see that they can't really effectively applied unless they truly kind of master the theories. So I think that like it's helpful for the students to kind of be pragmatic and practical as a kind of gateway into understanding these philosophical ideas, how they play out, but at the same, and it helps them to kind of then later abstract away and kind of then assess them in general, right, at the conceptual level. So I think that in general, I think students here really like applied philosophy, right? And I think that's also interesting, and it provides also its own challenges and its own stimulation.
That's great. I think with your experience, you taught different kinds of areas, subfields of philosophy here in UAE or outside the UAE. Did you witness any special interest from the students, especially in here, to some kind of subfields area of philosophy that affect their life in a practical or a pragmatic way?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. Just to build on my previous response, I think here I've noticed that students tend to be more interested in the fields of philosophy that we would classify under the heading of value theory, right? Mm-hmm. So they're really interested in normative, evaluative, ethical questions, right? And so, you know, I teach a lot of ethics and applied ethics, theoretical ethics. I also teach social and political philosophy, existentialism. And these are the kind of main courses, social theory. And these are courses that I teach here. And I find that these are really courses that the students find the most interesting and attractive. They're really interested in ethical problems, ethical questions, political ones, more and more. For example, when I first started, I had maybe 8 students enrolled in political philosophy, and now I have on average 25. So over the years, there's been a tripling of interest, let's say, in social and political philosophy. So students really are becoming interested in the relationship between citizen and state, global justice, human rights, environmental ethics, and so on. So they, I think, really what they profit from is kind of internalizing and grasping different ethical theories and then applying them to various domains, whether it be political, environmental, social, and so on. So I think students here are really keen on ethical and moral questions. Questions about happiness. What is happiness? What is the good life? What does it mean to be an individual, right? And so on. So I think, I would say more so than their peers in North America, they're a little bit more oriented towards value theory. Mm-hmm. And also, for example, in existentialism, where they're really interested in how philosophy can inform their existence, their lived experience. How can we use philosophy to make sense of their everyday lived experience in the world? And I find that students are really interested in these existential questions as well.
Do you like that kind of tendency towards how philosophy will affect our life, or you would say you would like most of they have a bias or a tendency also to abstract values?
Since I am basically a social and political philosopher myself, actually it works well for me. Actually, I find that's kind of led to a kind of harmonious, or let's say symbiotic relationship between myself and the students. So I think that has worked well for me here. The fact that already students are somehow predisposed to exploring these kinds of issues, and already they come to class with a curiosity, with an interest in developing, let's say, the theoretical and conceptual tools and resources that they can then use to apply on their own to various debates in these fields, whether it's politics, culture, ethics, and so on.
Maybe because of that you stayed in 5 years here in UAE.
Yes,
like the tendency to practical issues.
Exactly, and inshallah many more in the future. Yes.
If I thought about the motive of the act practicality or pragmatic, do you see it as because they want to improve their lives, or they want to improve the society themselves? Does it come from a collective or individual point of view?
Yeah, I think it's actually a mix of both. I think students here, when they enter into the philosophy class, they are interested in seeing how philosophy exactly might transform their lives for the better, but also, of course, how might they be able to transform the lives of others for the better, right? And I think this is why they tend to be very interested in these ethical and moral issues, right? Because they want to see they want some kind of guidance for their own lives, right? Because of course they're kind of at the threshold of adulthood, right? And you know, after graduating, they're going to be contributing to society in all different fields. So of course, you know, they are interested in self-development and their own. The progress of their own character, let's say, and the development of their own character. But at the same time, I think they're keenly aware that they cannot divorce this at the same time from their relationship with others, right? So I think that they really do, they really are aware of the social dimension, right, of philosophy, and that, you know, we are not islands unto ourselves, right? And so if we develop our own character, let's say, if we develop our own critical thinking and independent thinking, this will only have a salutary effect on our relationship with others. So I really do think that these two questions are intertwined, and that our students really are interested in both sides of the coin, so to speak.
The question in my mind is, what are the demographics of the students? Are they mostly from which areas? I don't think they are all Arabs or all Arab speaking. There are some kind of diversity.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at the AUS, for example, we have over 90 nationalities represented at the university, which is one of the most diverse campuses in the world. So I have students not just from the Arab world, but I have, you know, students from Asia, Southeast Asia. I also have, of course, students who are daughters and sons of expatriates. So they grew up here, but they're from various ethnicities and nationalities. So yeah, there's quite an interesting mix of students. And I find that is also one of the most stimulating and interesting aspects of teaching philosophy here, because you really get exposed also to various cultural backgrounds, and you get to see how these different cultural backgrounds play out in the students' views and their opinions and the way they think. So I think that's the demographics is also making it a very interesting environment to do philosophy.
Yeah, and it is to me. My follow-up question to that would be, did you observe any, so you said that most of them are practical, pragmatic, they tend to know more about how philosophy can affect their life. Do you see any diversity even within that kind of diverse demographics? Like, I would say 50% maybe from Arab worlds. What about the other nationalities? Even if they are living here, do they have some kind of diverse look into the philosophy, or all of them have that kind of unity in looking into philosophy?
I would say that I think I would say that the Arab students tend to be more interested, let's say, they're more interested in ethical questions, ethics. I think that is really, for example, you know, it's interesting because Aristotle's ethics, for example, I would say my Arab students are the most interested, or they find Aristotelian ethics the most interesting. And whereas this is not the case in North America, and necessarily with students from other cultural backgrounds. And of course, I think part of it has to do with the fact of the influence of Aristotle in the Islamic tradition, for example. And so that's also very interesting for me, since I'm also quite interested and sympathetic to Aristotelian ethics as well. So I noticed that. I think in the practical domain, I think also we noticed that there's a lot of students, of course, at the AUS who are doing like engineering and things like that, and of course science, scientific disciplines. So they're interested in how philosophy plays out, for example, in debates on ethics and AI, for example, right? So there's this interest in understanding what it means, what is consciousness, what is the nature of personhood, of course, in light of AI and robotics and all of these developments. So I think that, but in general, I would say that on the whole, I don't think that there are radical differences between, the Arab students and the students from the other backgrounds. But I just noticed that there are particular issues or particular philosophers that tend to resonate a little bit more with the Arab students, and simply because, again, like for example, Aristotle and Plato, and for example, and because there is this kind of reception, long-standing reception of Islamic philosophers engaging with ancient philosophy. So I think that there's a lot of resonance between ancient Greek philosophy and Arabic culture as a whole.
For me, I would say I read a lot regarding with contemporary philosophy or contemporary philosophers. You're saying to me right now that most students in the region would like the ancient philosophy. I don't know I should be happy or not right now.
Well, that's the thing, right? What I think it's important to realize is that a lot of, well, pretty much most of the moral theories that we employ today, right, in various domains, they're not new, right? I mean, they derive from philosophers who died centuries ago, whether that's Kantian ethics, consequentialism, or Aristotle's virtue ethics. Aristotle's virtue ethics, yes, it's older, but we haven't really innovated all that much in terms of our moral thinking, since, let's say, the Enlightenment period, right? So I think, and this is something that I try to highlight with my students, is that when we do the history of philosophy, right, this is not just purely, we're not kind of turning these philosophers into museum pieces, right, to be preserved, but rather we're looking at what is it in their frameworks, what is it in their ideas and their methodologies and so on that continue to influence contemporary discourse and debates, right? So I always kind of have this contemporary orientation, right? Because when we're interpreting
but
philosophy,
not contemporary philosophers.
No, of course, contemporary philosophers as well. We do study that, and I do teach contemporary philosophy. In fact, I'm doing this now. For example, I'm teaching a course on the reception of Martin Heidegger, for example, a 20th century philosopher in the Muslim world, right? So I'm teaching that this semester. I'm very excited to do that because, of course, we are reading contemporary philosophers from the Muslim world about how these ideas from Martin Heidegger, one of the most important 20th century philosophers, have influenced the Muslim world. So kind of seeing this kind of East-West dialogue in play and in action, right? And I think that's also something that students really resonate with and are really interested in, to kind of juxtapose different traditions and to put them into dialogue with one another, right? So I wouldn't be alarmed at all that students have interest in the history of philosophy. I think that's actually great, because also today we are so aware of all sorts of, so-called gurus and philosophers who really don't have, on social media and so on, who really don't have the qualifications to claim that. But what they're basically doing is recycling old ideas from these philosophers, right? So unless you have studied these philosophers, you won't be able to identify the real from the counterfeit, right? So I think this is also it speaks well of the students that they are willing and are interested in going back to the ancients and going back to the history of philosophy, because it still continues to influence the present, and it still has a lot to say about our contemporary situation.
If I want to go deep dive into the ideas that resonate with the student here, would you be able to mention what are the most important ideas that the student in philosophy engage with, comparing it also to other places in the world?
Sure. Like I think, especially one of the most, let's say, popular courses that I teach and that I think a lot of students resonate with is existentialism. So a lot of the concepts from that tradition really are very attractive to the students. For example, the notion of authenticity. For example, what does it mean to be an authentic subject, right? What does it mean to live a kind of singular, individualized existence rather than simply, let's say, living a kind of generic, conformist kind of life, right? That doesn't really exhibit any kind of distinctiveness or uniqueness, right? So what does it mean to be authentic? What does it mean to be, let's say, true to yourself? What does it mean to be also an autonomous, self-determining individual as well? So I think students are particularly interested in this kind of nexus of questions of authenticity, freedom, self-determination, and so on. of course, one concept that emerges in that context that I think students particularly like is, for example, the leap of faith of Kierkegaard, right? So they kind of like this, or they're attracted to this notion of taking a leap of faith, or which is a kind of active way of crafting meaning in one's life, right? In taking responsibility for the meaning of one's life, right? So they're really interested in this kind of nexus of authenticity, individuality, freedom, self-determination, responsibility. And these terms, of course, come up in other contexts as well, in the political context and in the social context, and so on. So we tend to explore them in various contexts. And again, it's also coming up in my course on Heidegger and Islamic philosophy as well. So yeah, I think, of course, students are also interested, as I mentioned, in all sorts of moral questions, right? So they're interested in, of course, virtue. What is virtue? Right. What does it mean to be a virtuous individual? Right. What does it mean to have a certain character? How do we develop character?
And these questions comes from the ancient philosophy still.
Of course, we have to start there, right? Of course, we have to start there. So yeah, that's also a very. These are also questions that students are very interested in as well. And of course, they're interested in things like the nature of consciousness and mind. Right, the relationship between mind and body, and so on. Especially, like I mentioned, in light of these technological advances in AI and so on, they're interested in the notion of personhood, right, and personal identity. Right, what does it mean to be a person? Who counts as a person? Right, what does it mean to be conscious? What does it mean to be self-conscious? Right, so this is another set of questions, kind of in. Metaphysics and epistemology, broadly construed philosophy of mind, that I think also students are quite interested in.
Do you see any kind of utilization of the Islamic Arabic culture, or even the Islamic texts into the discussion of philosophy? Did you observe that? Did you see how people can interact with that? How can they utilize their knowledge and Islamic religion, let's say, with the philosophy?
Yes, absolutely. And this is something that I benefit from the most. And actually, this is one of the reasons why I decided to teach that course on Heidegger and the Islamic world, precisely because I want to get the students, I want to get their background knowledge engaged in the course so that I can learn from that, right? Because they have expertise and knowledge that I don't have, right? So I can bring them the Heidegger, but they can also bring a dimension to the Heidegger that I can possibly bring to the table. Right. So one really good example in which they bring religion into the discussions is, for example, when I'm doing ethics, in my class on ethics, for example, we talk about egalitarianism, and we talk about charity and redistribution of wealth, right, globally, right? What do we need to do to, what is our moral obligation, for example, to the less well-off? Right. And of course, in those contexts, for example, students bring up all the time, and of course, rightly so, that, for example, in the Islamic tradition, right, there is this practice of giving a certain percentage of one's income to charity. And this is what a lot of philosophers, moral philosophers, who are, writing from completely different perspectives and traditions, are advocating.
Which we call zakah.
Yeah, zakat. Exactly, zakat. So this comes up, this is a perfect example, right, where students can kind of connect, right, their tradition with the contemporary discourse in philosophy, and see that, they have something to say and they have something to contribute from their own backgrounds, and they can contribute to a kind of cosmopolitan, kind of global discourse on ethics, right? It's not just about, the validity of these ideas are not simply restricted to their own culture in principle, right? They can see that actually, no, it might have a much wider application. It might be something that other societies should adopt as well, right? And that we might adopt globally to solve these problems, right? So this is a one wonderful example of how their own cultural background, their own religious background can contribute to the debates and the discourse in the class.
I like that, the way that the culture, the local culture can interact with the global questions.
Absolutely.
Right? Would you like to share some kind of suggestions to the new learner of philosophy in here or globally? Or some kind of books that you will suggest students or even viewers to read?
Yeah, I mean, I first and foremost, I think I would suggest the following, namely that I think students should challenge themselves to read the original texts, right? And not to rely on other people to explain it for them. I try to always do this in all of my classes, even at the introductory level. I have them read the classics. I have them read Aristotle. I have them read Mill, Kant, and so on, right? Because again, today especially in social media, YouTube, yeah, there are a lot of people talking about philosophy, but they're not particularly qualified to do so. And there's really no substitute for engaging with these original texts, personally and individually, right? It's a challenge at first. Once you get the hang of it, once you begin to enter into let's say the conceptual world of the philosopher, there's no going back, right? You then can really develop a skill that you can, that is with you for a lifetime, right? So I would really, the first thing that I would just suggest before I would even suggest anything in particular would be to be open and challenge yourself to read the originals, right? Don't rely on other people's summaries, other people's, commentaries, right? And that can be at any age. When I was younger, even in high school and so on, I was, engaged in reading, the ancients, for example, and Plato, Aristotle, and so on. There's no really age where limit, when it comes to that. But I would say, for example, today, what is particularly popular, for example, Stoicism, right? Stoicism as an ethical theory is very popular. You see it on YouTube and so on. There's a lot of videos, but there's really no substitute for reading, for example, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, right? They're short, they're accessible, and if you really want, self-help, and this is again a very hot topic these days, right? There's really no substitute for reading the original, the classics, like Marcus Aurelius, for example.
Thank you, Dr. Kurt.
Thank you very much, Khaled. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it.